Tonight, I am going to be talking about the book Interconnected by Galwan Karmapa, and I'm on the section about equality and diversity. And I'm starting tonight where I left off last week on the section titled Hierarchy and Power. It's on page 91 of my copy of the book. Karmapa talks about whenever equality is measured through external means, differences in our circumstances taken as a sign that we are somehow inherently different, and that it's easy to feel that hierarchies are natural and fixed, and it's supposed to be this way, whereas they're actually temporary constructs. They're not permanent and they're not inherent. Because of interdependence, the powerful need to have weak under them, weak people, weak beings under them. And the weak need to have powerful people over them. And leaders need followers. Fame requires people that you might say adore them and bestow fame on them. What comes to mind with fame, of course, is Taylor Swift and Swifties. Where would she be without Swifties? I'm not sure, but that's something to think about. When it gets right down to it, happiness depends on others, whether you're on top or on the bottom. It's inevitable that we need others for us to get what we need in life, whether it be food, clothing, shelter, fame, happiness, or just whatever we feel is important to us. Karmapa says it's difficult to avoid hard times if those around you are experiencing hard times. In other words, we are interconnected, we are interdependent on others for our happiness, and that, of course, is a problem if we place our happiness on the difficulties of other people. If we try to somehow or another attain happiness by causing problems for other people. If we consider other people, even in hierarchical relationships, then we can help each other. Quote, what makes us equal is not the place we occupy in a social order, but the fact that we are human beings and therefore endowed with the potential for goodness and the capacity to feel pain and joy. So hierarchy, it's just a provisional way of ordering people and relationships, with everyone giving and receiving something from other people. So everything arises from causes and conditions. These things are not ordained from above. They're not eternal. They are temporary. He talks about governments, which are organized, of course, hierarchically, and that a great deal of power could be concentrated in the hands of a president, a prime minister. He doesn't mention a king, but I'll mention a king. And the idea, or ideally, it is for benefiting the country and the people that live in the country, rather than for the benefit of the leader that has all this power. He adds some mistake privilege in a hierarchy for an opportunity to have their self-interests benefited rather than the interests of the country and the citizens of that country. So this is something I think is quite pertinent for the United States today and other countries as well, that a person at the top, when they start using their position for personal interests, it is counterproductive and the country is not going to function properly. And that person can cause a lot of damage. And he even uses the word before the person is removed one way or another. That's my addition, one way or another. So anyway, it's important for people, all levels of society, to understand the interdependent relationships that are present in hierarchies. Again, this is somewhat repetitive, that we need to have this sense of universal responsibility and basic concern for others, that without that, things do not function very well. We have to also keep in mind that these hierarchies, that the social order is created for a particular purpose, a particular historical condition or conditions, and that when hierarchy is outlasted its purpose, when it's no longer relevant, it's time to change. This is a fundamental part of Buddhism, is impermanence. And so when it is not functioning properly, the hierarchy needs to adjust in some way or another and change to new circumstances. He goes on in the next section, which is titled Social Inequality is Not Natural. And that's a very important point. He feels that almost all inequality is man-made, as opposed to, well, it's natural, or this is the way things are, or it comes from a higher power, a supreme being. He asked the question, do we have an equal right to happiness? And of course, we do, is the answer. In the present world that we live in, power and access to it is related to wealth. That healthcare and education usually require money, and that education increases access to money. In most cases, it isn't that way in all cases, but there's a definite statistical relationship to education level and income level, and also to power. It's been pointed out recently that so many of the people in the federal government, the officials that are elected in the Senate and the House of Representatives, are quite wealthy compared to the rest of us, and many of them have Ivy League educations. They're not a representative of the population that they represent. Human beings made this order. We're responsible for improving it. And blame doesn't help. It's easy to point the finger and blame, though it is this way because of such and such or so and so, or certain type of people and so forth. But we're all interdependent, and we buy the products of the wealthy. It's that simple. We vote for the powerful. We go along with the way things are. We go along with inequality. So we need to be aware of this, and we can make better choices, whether it be when we're shopping, when we're voting, or in other types of behavior. He then goes on to talk about the environment and animals and points out that mankind as a species has caused tremendous damage to the environment, great harm to animals. A lot of animals are facing extinction or have become extinct in the last 100 years. If we care about animals, there is much less harm to them and to the environment. He goes on to point out that since we do this to non-human species, it's not surprising that humans do this to each other as well. We don't seem to care too much about what goes on in other parts of the world or even within our country, whether it be the United States or China or certain countries in Africa, South America, and on and on. If you really look closely, there is a tremendous amount of inequality in the world, and there's a lot of suffering. For me, I keep being surprised by how many people are living on the street, whether you call them unhoused or homeless or some other word. It was not this way when I grew up. And the same thing with the prison population. The prison population has gone up tremendously. There was a documentary that PBS did. I'm going to say it could have been as much as 15 years ago, and it was titled The New Asylums. And they closed most of the mental asylums for various reasons. And what happened then, these people were homeless, you might say, and they would get caught up in the criminal justice system. And now 25% of the prison population in the United States is mentally ill because they don't know what else to do with them. And once they get sucked into the system, a mentally ill person has a really hard time getting out and getting paroled and staying out and following the rules. So it's just one little thing about how the system is not equal for all people. Take your pick of which country and what issue. But he goes into now patriarchy, that women are equal to men, whereas men are on top and try to stay on top. And he feels that today, in today's world, we need the feminine qualities more than the masculine qualities. That change requires both men and women to work on this because of interdependence. But and he feels that one of the problems is the people on top think that if they give equal rights to the people that are under them, that means they are losing something, that the people gain that are under them and they have to give up something. And he says that's thinking like divorce, where you divorce your partner takes part of the property with her or him. It isn't that kind of a situation. Men and women have the same basic worth, and we need to look at it in terms of that, the value of a human being, and that women need to have this same basic worth, these same basic rights as human beings that men have. This is very different than thinking that you have the right to dominate another person or another sex. What we really need to have is to connect with this equality and avoid seeing one is higher or lower than another. If you look at a point from a viewpoint of higher, then diversity looks like a problem because you're not looking at real equality. So, what is the resource that we need to bridge these differences and these inequalities is empathy. Empathy helps us relate to people that are different from us, to see that they want to be happy like we do, and they suffer just like we do, maybe for different reasons. If we can cut through all the ideas of, well, if I give equal rights to others, then I give up rights. This can cut through that, and we can actually end up doing something. We can develop a deeper connection, which empathy can bring. So that's how he finishes that last section, and that ends this chapter, chapter 4. And actually, that ends the whole first section, which he talks about how to intellectually understand the problems that we face and how we need to look at these problems and try to make a difference. So the second section of the book is feeling the connection. And this section here, the first chapter is chapter 5, From Empathy to Courageous Compassion. So empathy is a beginning that leads to what he calls courageous compassion. So the positive qualities of empathy, courage, compassion, and wisdom are within us. They're not outside of us. They are within us. And by increasing our emotional awareness of interdependence, this changes our inner world, and that influences how we relate to the outer world. So this is how change happens, is we work with our inner world, and then from that, we bring it out into the outer world. We have the freedom to influence the outer world and outer beings. Quote, there are no worlds that are apart from other worlds. We have to remember that due to interdependence, there is no world that you might say other people dwell in that is independent from the world that we dwell in. And of course, ultimately, there's not many worlds. It's just that we tend to think this is the way I relate to things, this is the way my friends relate to things, and this is the right way. And these people that disagree with me, they're living in a different world. There's actually a lot of talk about this in the United States right now because of the different parties that seem to be coming from very, very different worlds. So we do have power. We have our inherent compassion, our wisdom, our discernment. I like this. He uses the term our imagination, our human intelligence, that we have these and that we have a responsibility to influence the world. And wherever we are, the world is there with us, one way or another. We can't escape, you might say. Then the next section is titled Walking a Mile Towards a Common Goal. Empathy is a very important way to move our awareness of interdependence from our head to our heart, and from there to our action. With empathy, we realize that we are very profoundly connected to other people. When we empathize with others, we gain some insight into their inner experience. We have it on an emotional level. It's no longer an intellectual level or a thought or a concept or some principle. It's actually we are experiencing our emotional connections to others. And this way, empathy realizes or helps us see that ignorance and egocentrism really don't work. We can see the weaknesses of that. What comes to my mind is this happened many, many years ago. I was in a parking lot of a strip mall, and a biker came out of a store, a pet store, in his black leather jacket with a big emblem on the back. I don't know what it was. And he had a chain going from his wallet, in his hip pocket to some other part of his pants, and metal studs. And he looked pretty ferocious. And he had in his hand a clear plastic bag full of water and a goldfish. He had a warm spot in his heart for a goldfish. When he took it home, he had to feed it. He had to take care of it, even if it was minimal. The point being, he gave me a different way to look at a biker. If we really look closely at other people, we find so much that we can connect emotionally with them. This emotional connection is really important when we view ourselves as separate, unique, independent. We don't see this connection. We just see them as almost objects. And if we can nourish this emotional connection, we can see them at a very different level. Quote, when we look at others or think of others, we can remind ourselves of our universal base of inner equality and then try to experience their situations from their perspective rather than our own. And he mentions the Native American saying, you need to walk a mile in the shoes of another person to really understand them, understand why they behave the way they do and say the things that they do, and so forth. So, what empathy helps us do, and we need to encourage, is to see others the way they see the world, the way they see themselves, the way they experience things and feel. And this empathy allows equanimity to develop, that we can feel certain equality with them, that we have so much in common with them, that we want to be happy like they want to be happy. They want to avoid suffering like we want to avoid suffering. They just have a different way of doing that. The next section here is titled Connected from Birth. And he starts out by saying that empathy is inherent with newborns. Children can see pain in others when adults don't see it. As we age, we tend to diminish this capacity of ours to feel the pain of others and to empathize with others. We harden our heart. We think we're protecting ourselves by hardening our heart, but this is diminishing our capacity to empathize with others. And he speculates that perhaps socialization methods could change that would nourish the empathy rather than diminish it. I made a note here, which is socialization is a technical Western term. This is not in Buddhism. It shows you a bit about his understanding of the West, that he can use these terms and use them properly. So he obviously has studied a lot about, let's say, just Western texts, or has his tutors teaching him about this. I am reminded of, in his book, The Heart is Noble, at one point he is talking about computers and technology. And he said, there is a joke about how they built the world's largest computer, and then they asked it, what is the meaning of life? And it worked for decades, maybe a millennium, on this problem. And it finally came up with an answer, which was 42. And that comes directly from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so there was a program on BBC TV, which I watched, and that's how I learned about that joke. And I wouldn't be surprised if he watched a few Hitchhiker Guides to the Galaxy episodes. So he's maybe a little more wise about Western culture than you might think. Now, getting back to empathy, here's a personal story. Many years ago, this was long before I was a monk, I used to sell firewood. I didn't sell a lot of it, but I sold some. I burnt firewood to heat my house, and I would make a little extra and sell it for some money, of course. And I would drive a fence post in the ground, and then 8 feet next to it, I'd drive another, and then I'd put firewood up to 4 feet high. So 8 feet by 4 feet by the width of the cut pieces of wood. And I would tell the person, so much for this amount of wood. And I usually would not help them throw it into their trailer or the pickup truck. And this one day, a man came and bought it, and he had his little daughter with him. And I went into the house and did some other things, or I might have gone out to the barn. But anyway, I left while he loaded it up. And when I came back, he had it all loaded up, and the little girl said, did my dad buy that pile too? And I said, no. Well, he took some pieces of wood out of it. And I didn't say anything. I just kind of got a grin on my face. But here you have the little girl that knows the difference between right and wrong, and she pointed it out. And little kids, they know a lot. And that's what he's talking about here, that little kids know about empathy too. And they can be, instead of tamping down their empathy and hardening their heart, It can be encouraged to stay soft and even softer, become softer. Now he goes on in the next section, which is titled No Social Health Without it being empathy. So empathy is healthy. He feels that lack of it could be seen as a disease, even. It's harmful to people that lack it. And of course, to people who they meet and have to interact with, that a kind word, a look of recognition, little things like that can make a huge difference. There's so many ways to express this warmth that empathy brings. And of course, empathy helps us make decisions that affect other people. There is, of course, the feedback after we have done something, said something that affected another person, how they responded. Did it cause them delight, cause them some kind of emotional pain? Was it neutral? Did they even understand what you were saying? Sometimes I will tell jokes and people don't get it. But the point being is that we want to have our actions clearly understood by the people that are affected by them. So empathy, the impairment of empathy is unhealthy. And if we're going to have a healthy society, we're going to have one that is less competitive and sees empathy as a quality. He says that it's good to look at political speeches for empathy. Is the politician expressing empathy, or is he expressing a lack of empathy? That we should use this as a measure of their leadership qualities. Very simply because of our connectedness, our interdependence. We need to care about the consequences of our words and our actions on other people. Empathy keeps us concerned, and empathy helps us to understand the experiences of our actions, how we affect other people, how our actions affect other people. So engaging in empathy will help us make better decisions and more aware of the pain or delight that we may cause for other people. And then I end this section with a little bit of my own. Well, I'm just adding this, and that is he does not mention that some people feel a lack of empathy is a quality, that it's a sign of weakness to feel empathy for other people or an animal. But if we're going to be empathetic, we need to be empathetic for people that see empathy as a fault as well as a quality. Now he goes into, and this is actually a good lead into the next section, which is how empathy can become impaired. So negative environments stunt it, keep it from developing. On the other end, there are things that we can do to increase our own empathy. The task is not to judge so much other people and their lack of empathy, but what can we do to develop more empathy and to just put more into the world and perhaps help bring others up in terms of helping them become more empathetic. And it's not a matter of creating something that was never there. It's just encouraging what is there. The seeds of empathy are always there. He talks about how in terms of the global society that competition and greed are celebrated, they're encouraged, and so forth, and that this pits people one against another, one society against another, one culture, one class, and so forth, and that this is a huge problem in the world today, that this sense of seeing yourself as separate, independent, and so forth is reinforced constantly in the world society and on the internet and social media. And we need to explore ways to diminish this competition and encourage and nourish empathy. He even mentions Hitler, as he was known to feel empathy towards dogs. So even Hitler had some empathy present in him. It obviously was very narrowly focused. I remember attending a talk by Mingyur Rinpoche, and he said this, that even a crocodile has love and compassion. When a crocodile is hungry, he attacks so that he can be happy with a full belly. And if he's in danger of being attacked, the crocodile retreats because he wants to avoid suffering. So he has compassion for himself. And if you think about that, then all beings have this seed of compassion and love, and it just needs to be developed. I can't say that I'm going to go out and try to train crocodiles to be more compassionate and loving, but people have more flexibility. This is something that an animal, it's very difficult to train an animal, but human beings have the ability to be flexible and be change. And there is lots that we can do to develop more empathy and compassion. Here is a quote by Karmapa. The challenge would be to train such people to broaden or transfer the feeling of tenderness and care that they are able to feel towards certain people or animals to other beings as well. And of course, we could all benefit from this. He feels that empathy can grow until it becomes, quote, an unbearable, unconditional response to the suffering of all beings without exception. So this is the direction that he is wanting us to go in, and that the world would benefit from if it went in this direction. Now he says that there is a difference between pity and empathy, that pity has an element of superiority. You know, you see a starving animal, an abused animal, and you feel pity for it. But you feel superior for it instead of empathy. And the same thing can be if you see a starving child. There's a lot, well, Christmas time, I was swamped with snail mail and email appeals with pictures of starving children wanting to donate to this particular fund or that particular fund and so forth. And yes, it's horrible to see these children that are literally starving to death, children that are being killed and disfigured and or terrorized by aerial bombardments in Gaza and so forth. but this can be pity rather than empathy. Empathy is very different. It's seeing more that they are on the same level as you, and it's a more direct connection. When it's pity, it's more like you're giving money to ease your guilt, to make yourself feel better rather than to empathize directly with that being that is suffering or that group of beings that are suffering. That pity has he used the word self-validation, proving to yourself that you're a good person and so forth. And it's a one-way street versus a two-way street. Empathy is a two-way street, whereas pity is a one-way street. Then the next section is our backstage pass. And here he is talking about with an open mind, we understand better what's going on inside of ourselves. And when we understand what's going on inside of ourselves, we have a better understanding of what's going on inside other people too. When we just look at impressions we have of other people from their external behavior, what they say, what they do, what they wear, it's really very, very superficial. It's limited, and that we easily make too many snap judgments. Whereas empathy helps us to see below the surface, beneath the veneer that we all put up. And it opens up our heart, it opens up our mind, and we begin to see and hear people at a much deeper level. This is what he means by this backstage pass, that we get to see at a much deeper level. We get to understand them. Quote, each person has within them an inner emotional world, a back story, and a backstage where things have been evolving and are decided long before they are revealed to the public. Empathy can serve as a backstage pass, giving us access to the reasons and forces impelling others' actions. So if we can understand ourselves better, we can understand other people better. If we can have more empathy for ourselves, we can have more empathy for other people. If we really try to understand other people, we can, in his words, find something understandable there. And this is a two-way street, which is very different from pity. This is interconnected. And this reminds me of an experience that I had that I'm going to relate to. This was around 2002, approximately. The date is not that important. But the Dalai Lama gave a program in Mountain View, California, which is the heart of Silicon Valley. And it was titled the Heart Sutra, or Teaching on the Heart Sutra. And so many people were registering for this program that they changed the venue and they switched to an outdoor amphitheater that is used for rock concerts. He gave an empowerment there, and I think there was something like 15,000 people that attended, to give you an idea of this venue. It was outside. This is California, so it's always sunny, Southern California. And There was kind of a natural hill there. Being a monk, I sat up on stage with him. You might say, had a backstage pass. There were 200 other people on stage with the Dalai Lama, but this would be the stage where the rock band would be performing. And I would go in the separate entrance from the people in the general audience. So behind the stage, there was a coffee shop with help that were in there all the time. And, this would be the same for a rock concert. So you could go there and get coffee, get something to eat, and so forth anytime you wanted. It was for free. This program went on for, I think it was 6 days, by the way. So I was a regular at that coffee shop. And I went in there one time and I asked one of the workers there if they had listened to any of the Dalai Lama's talks. And the person said, no, but it feels so good to have him here. And they were just picking up on the presence of the Dalai Lama and the presence of everybody else and the way everybody was feeling, that it was palpable. And I thought that is a good way to end this section on a backstage pass.